Marcus Clark told his wife to wash his girlfriend's car. He said it the way he said most things to her by then, without looking up, without inflection, already walking away, as if the request were so small it barely needed a voice at all. Vanessa's car is muddy. Clean it before she heads back. And Josephine Clark, standing in the hallway of the home she had kept for 11 years, looked at the bucket in the garage, looked at the wrapped brace on her left wrist, and went outside into the rain. Vanessa Tran was inside, sitting in Josephine's living room, on Josephine's couch. And Marcus's mother, Gloria, was in the kitchen making that woman a cup of coffee, in Josephine's kitchen, with Josephine's cups. As if this were simply how things were now, and Josephine should understand that. What none of them knew, not Marcus, not Vanessa, not Gloria standing at that counter with a mug in her hand, was that the driveway Josephine knelt on, the house behind her, and the energy consulting firm that paid for all of it sat on land whose mineral rights were controlled in perpetuity by a private trust worth $2.04 billion. And the sole trustee of that trust was the woman they had just sent outside with a bucket. The rain came down steady. Josephine worked without rushing. This is not just a story about a woman washing a car. It is about what happens when the most powerful person in the room has spent years allowing everyone else to believe she is the least important one. If you believe a woman's silence is never the same as her weakness, hit that like button. This story is for you. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. And drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. This community spans every continent, and we want to hear from you, now. To understand what Josephine did next, we need to go back to where this story truly began. She found the bucket on the second shelf of the garage, behind a box of Kofi's old soccer cleats and a bag of rock salt they'd bought 2 winters ago for a freeze that never came. She filled it at the outdoor spigot. The water was cold enough to sting, and she felt it through the thin latex of the single glove she'd found in her coat pocket. She hadn't been able to get the glove onto her left hand over the brace, so that hand stayed bare. She didn't hurry. She carried the bucket to the champagne gold sedan, and she began. The rain was not heavy. It was the kind of Houston November rain that doesn't commit. A fine, persistent mist that soaks you slowly and completely, the way certain griefs do. Josephine worked from the hood backward. She used the sponge in long, even strokes. Her bare left hand ached where she gripped, and she shifted her weight every few minutes to keep the pressure off her wrist. She did not think about Marcus. She did not think about Vanessa Tran, sitting dry on her couch, scrolling through her phone with the ease of a woman who has never once had to consider whether she belonged somewhere. She thought about her father. She thought about the way Chief Emmanuel Adeyemi had smelled, cedar and something warmer underneath, the particular warmth of a man who had spent 50 years making things out of nothing. She thought about his hands, which were always slightly rough and always warm, and the way he used to hold her face between them when he had something important to say, as if he needed to be sure her whole attention was held before the words arrived. She was still thinking about him when Marcus appeared in the doorway. He stood there for perhaps 30 seconds. She could feel him without looking. The weight of his gaze, which was not concern and was not guilt, and was not quite indifference either, but something in between those things that was harder to name. Then the door closed. He had gone back inside. She kept working. When the water running off the hood ran clear, she stopped. She wrung the sponge out. She carried the bucket back to the garage, replaced the sponge on its hook, and stood for a moment in the dry, her wet cardigan heavy on her shoulders, the left sleeve darker than the right where the rain had soaked through the crook of her elbow. She dried her hands on the hem of the cardigan, her father's cardigan, the gray one that still held, if she pressed her face into the collar, the faintest trace of the leather chair in his Lagos study. She walked back through the house, past Vanessa, who didn't look up, past Marcus in the kitchen, who glanced at her and then at his coffee, past Gloria's coat on the rack by the door, hung as though it lived there. Josephine's feet were wet inside her shoes. She didn't stop moving until she reached the bedroom. She closed the door. She sat on the edge of the bed. The room was quiet in the way rooms go quiet when the rest of the house is making noise. She could hear laughter filtering up through the floor, low and easy, and she sat with it the way you sit with weather that isn't yours to change. She reached for her phone on the nightstand and held it without unlocking it. The gray cardigan was still damp against her shoulders. She didn't take it off. There was a question she had been turning over for 14 months. The way water turns a stone, not violently, not even noticeably, but without ever stopping. And tonight, in this room, above that laughter, the question had finally worn itself smooth enough to answer. But to understand why the answer came now and not before, you need to know who Chief Emmanuel Adeyemi was. You need to know what he built and what he carried and what he spent the last 6 months of his life making absolutely certain his daughter would never have to face alone. Chief Emmanuel Adeyemi was born in Ibadan in 1948, the third son of a school teacher who owned 4 books and believed, with a certainty that bordered on doctrine, that a man who could read had everything he needed to begin. Emmanuel read everything. He finished secondary school at 16, university at 20, and arrived in Lagos in 1971 with a postgraduate certificate in civil engineering, a borrowed suit, and an introduction to a man named Festus Okafor, who was looking for someone to oversee the laying of a natural gas pipeline across 40 kilometers of delta terrain. It was not a prestigious contract. It was muddy, technical work in difficult conditions, and 3 other engineers had already declined it. Emmanuel took it without hesitation. He finished it 4 weeks ahead of schedule. That was the beginning. 1 contract became 3. 3 became a portfolio. The portfolio became a structure, and the structure, over 53 years of expansion, so quiet and so deliberate that it barely disturbed the surface of any public record, became the Adeyemi Foundation. He was not a reckless man. He was not an ostentatious one. He built in private because he understood, earlier than most, that visibility is a liability. The men whose names appeared in newspapers found themselves in courtrooms. The men whose names appeared in no newspapers built things that lasted. He registered holding entities across Lagos, London, and Delaware. He diversified into pharmaceutical distribution, agricultural land acquisition, and sovereign infrastructure financing across West Africa and the American South. He hired people who were smarter than he was in the areas where he was not smart, and he paid them well enough that loyalty was rational rather than sentimental. In 2003, a young attorney named Adaz Nwosu, 37 years old and newly elevated to partner at a Dallas firm called Whitmore Crane, sent him a 14-page memorandum arguing that 3 specific clauses in the foundation's Delaware trust structure created exposure he had not accounted for. She was right. He called her the following morning. She has managed the foundation's American legal architecture ever since. Josephine grew up moving between Lagos and London, the only child of a man who treated her education as the most important infrastructure project he would ever fund. She studied economics at UCL. She studied international asset law in private, at her father's elbow for 4 years after that. Not because he required it, because she was curious, and he was the most interesting mind she had ever encountered, and because she understood without being told that she would one day carry what he was building. She met Marcus Clark in Houston in 2010, at a conference on energy sector investment, where she was attending as a foundation observer, and he was presenting a paper on mid-market consulting models with the energetic confidence of a man who had worked very hard to be in that room. He was charming. He was focused. He had built Clark Meridian Group from nothing, through genuine effort and genuine intelligence. And he wore that fact the way some men wear good watches, not as decoration, but as evidence. She liked him. She liked the directness of him. Chief Emmanuel met Marcus precisely once in the spring of 2012, at a dinner in Lagos that lasted 2 hours. He asked Marcus one question across the table. What had he built that he was proud of? Marcus answered for 11 minutes. Chief Emmanuel listened without interrupting. Later that night, when Josephine asked what he thought, her father held her face in both his hands. His palms always warm, she would remember that her whole life, and said only, "Watch how a man speaks about what he has not yet earned." Then he smiled, which meant he was not forbidding anything, only observing. They married in Houston in September 2012. The prenuptial agreement Josephine signed 3 weeks before the wedding was 41 pages long. Marcus was shown 4 pages of it. the sections establishing separate property designation for pre-existing assets. He was told it was a standard inheritance formality. It was not standard. It was a legal architecture designed by Edais Nwosu specifically to ensure that no element of the Adeyemi Foundation could ever be classified as a marital asset, commingled with shared finances, or subjected to any claim arising from the marriage's dissolution. Marcus signed his portion without asking for his own attorney to review it. This detail would become relevant later. The early years were good, genuinely good. Amara was born in 2014, and Marcus carried her through the house at 3 in the morning with a patience Josephine had not expected from him and loved him for. Kofi came in 2016, loud from the first hour. Marcus coached Kofi's first soccer team at age 4. He called Josephine Joe then, with real warmth in it. She kept her foundation paperwork in a locked drawer in the home office and reviewed it quarterly with a days on call she took privately. It was not deception. It was what her father had asked, and she had no reason yet to question the wisdom of his instruction. Then came 2021, and a morning in March when Chief Emmanuel called her from Lagos, his voice carrying a new quality she had not heard before. Not fear, but precision. The kind of precision a man adopts when he has been told something and has already decided what to do about it. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 3. They had caught it, he said, in time to be useful. He did not tell her he was afraid. He told her it was time to learn everything. Chief Emmanuel died on a Tuesday morning in September 2022 in the Lagos compound where he had lived for 40 years, with Josephine holding his left hand and a nurse named Sister Comfort OB holding his right. He did not make a speech. He did not offer final words dramatic enough to be carved into stone. He looked at his daughter for a long moment, and then he closed his eyes, and then he was gone. Simple as that. As permanent as that. Josephine stayed in Lagos for 3 weeks after the funeral. She met with Adais twice, reviewed the trust transfer documentation, signed 47 pages of instrument completions, and sat every evening in her father's study in the leather chair that smelled like him, with his ledger in her lap, reading nothing. Just sitting. Just being in the last space where the air still carried something of him. Marcus did not come for the funeral. The quarterly review, he said, could not be moved. He sent flowers to the compound, white lilies in a tall arrangement that Josephine's aunt quietly moved to a back room because no one in the family could look at them. She flew home to Houston on a Thursday. Marcus picked her up from the airport, which surprised her. He was waiting at the arrivals gate with a coffee from the shop inside. The right order, her order, which he still knew then. He held her for a long moment at the gate, and she pressed her face against his shoulder and breathed, and for a few weeks after that, the marriage felt like a place she could still live. Then something shifted. It did not happen in a single moment. It accumulated the way damage does in a structure that looks sound from the outside, invisibly, incrementally in places no one thinks to check. Marcus stopped asking about her days in the spring of 2023. Not all at once. He simply asked less frequently, then occasionally, then not at all. And Josephine noticed but did not say so, because grief had already taught her that some losses you register quietly and keep moving. His comments about her appearance began that same spring. Not cruel at first, more like observations delivered in passing, without looking at her. You've been wearing that cardigan a lot. Have you been sleeping? Once at a dinner party hosted by his colleague Darren Webb, he glanced at her across the table and then said something to the woman beside him that made the woman laugh, and did not explain it to Josephine when they drove home. She did not ask. Then Gloria arrived for Thanksgiving. Gloria Clark was 69 years old, small-framed, and dressed with the particular precision of a woman who has always believed that appearance is character. She hugged Josephine at the door with both arms and said it was so good to see her, and then, within 20 minutes of being in the kitchen, had rearranged 2 drawers and asked whether the turkey had been brined correctly. Josephine had brined it for 18 hours. She said nothing. At the dinner table, with Marcus's 2 cousins and Darren Webb and his wife present, Gloria tasted the jollof rice Josephine had made from her own mother's recipe. The recipe Josephine had memorized at 11 years old in a Lagos kitchen, and set down her fork and said pleasantly, To no one in particular. It's a little dry, isn't it? It happens. Not everyone has the feel for it. She smiled when she said it. She touched Josephine's arm. Marcus did not correct her. He reached for the bread. Josephine felt something tighten across her chest briefly, and then she let it go. She passed the gravy and asked Darren's wife about her daughter's school play, and the conversation moved on, and Gloria refilled her wine, and that was the end of it. Except that it was not the end of it. It was the beginning of a pattern so consistent that by February of the following year, Josephine could predict the shape of each visit. The compliment at the door, the rearranged drawer, the comment delivered sideways, the silence from Marcus that confirmed everything. It was around this time that she began scheduling her calls with Adazi more regularly. Not monthly as they had been, every 2 weeks. She would take the calls from the car, parked in the driveway of the house she had made into a home, and she and Adazi would review the foundation's quarterly position and the trust's instrument status. And occasionally Adazi would say in her measured way, "Is there anything we should be preparing for?" And Josephine would say, "Not yet." And Adazi would say, "Understood." And the call would end. She was not acting. She was watching. There is a difference, and Josephine understood it. Then came the name. She saw it first on Marcus's phone in March. The screen lit on the kitchen counter while he was in the shower, a message preview visible just long enough for her to register it. Vanessa. A single sentence beneath it that she did not read fully. She looked away. She stood at the kitchen sink and ran cold water over her hands and told herself she had misread it, or that it was nothing, or that grief had made her suspicious of things that did not warrant suspicion. She told herself this for 6 weeks. She stopped telling herself this on a Tuesday night in May, when she passed the hallway on the way to check on Amara and heard Marcus's voice from behind the study door. Low, warm, unhurried. A voice she recognized and could not place for a moment, and then could. It was the voice he had used with her once, early, when she was still the person he called at the end of a day because she was the one he wanted to tell things to. She stood in the hallway. She did not move for a long time. She did not open the door. She did not say his name. She went to Amara's room, stood in the doorway watching her daughter sleep, and was very still and very certain, and said nothing at all. She did not confront him, not that night, not the following morning, not in the weeks that came after. This was not weakness. This was something her father had modeled his entire life. The understanding that a response deployed too early is a resource wasted. She had learned to conserve. What she could not conserve was her access to the joint account. That ended on a Wednesday in January, quietly without discussion. She discovered it at the checkout counter of a Kroger on Westheimer Road, her cart full, Amara beside her, reading the back of a cereal box, when her card declined. She tried it twice. The cashier, a young woman named Destiny with a patient expression, suggested she try a different card. Josephine said she would sort it out and paid with cash she found in the bottom of her bag, short by $4, and the woman behind her in line covered it without being asked. And that small kindness was the thing Josephine had to work hardest not to react to. She called Marcus from the parking lot. He answered on the first ring, which told her he had been expecting the call. He explained it as financial consolidation. He said it calmly, in the tone he used for things he had already decided were not negotiable. The joint account would be managed from his side going forward. If she needed something, she should ask him, and he would make sure it was handled. He said the words, "make sure it was handled," with a particular emphasis, the way you speak to someone who requires oversight. She said she understood. She drove home. She did not tell him what she actually understood. 2 weeks later, Gloria came for a visit. She arrived on a Thursday, a small rolling suitcase and a casserole dish wrapped in foil, and found Josephine in the kitchen and said, before she had fully removed her coat, that she wanted to have a little conversation, woman to woman, if that was all right. She sat at the kitchen table with her hands folded and spoke in the measured, concerned tone she had refined over 69 years into something almost indistinguishable from love. Marcus, she said, was under a great deal of pressure. The firm was going through a difficult period. He needed at home a certain kind of stability that... She paused here, adjusted her hands. that grief could make very difficult to provide. She was not criticizing. She was sharing, woman to woman, because she cared about this family. She thought Josephine should consider carefully what she was bringing to this household right now. Whether her presence, in its current form, was what Marcus needed. She referenced Chief Emmanuel's death with the precise delicacy of someone using a wound as a lever. Josephine looked at her across the table for a moment. Then she said she appreciated Gloria's concern and asked if she would like more coffee. Gloria said yes, and that was the end of the conversation. And Josephine stood at the counter, filling the cup, and kept her hands very steady and did not say another word about it. She called Adais that evening from the car, not to act, to update the record. Adais listened, asked 2 clarifying questions, and said, "Understood." The call lasted 7 minutes. It was enough. The school was next. Josephine learned about it from Amara's teacher, Miss Patricia Owens, who mentioned in passing at the February pickup that she'd been sending the term reports to Mr. Clark directly, per his request, since she understood things had been a little difficult at home lately. Ms. Owens said it with the careful neutrality of a woman trying not to take sides in something she had been given only one side of. Josephine smiled. She told Ms. Owens she appreciated knowing that, and that going forward all school communications should come to both parents equally. She said it without raising her voice. Ms. Owens nodded and updated the record right there. The garage door code changed in March. She discovered it on a Thursday afternoon, returning from school pickup with both children in the back seat, when the code she had used for 9 years produced nothing. She sat in the driveway and called Marcus. He answered on the 3rd try. He gave her the new code in the same voice he might use to relay a minor piece of administrative information, then ended the call without asking how she was. Then came the firm's annual spring event held at the Houstonian Hotel on a Thursday evening in April. Marcus had invited her, which itself felt like a statement, like a man establishing a paper trail of normalcy. She wore a green dress and went. Vanessa Tran was there. Josephine recognized her before she registered why. The posture, the easy way she moved through the room, the precise angle at which she stood beside Marcus near the bar. They were not introduced. Marcus did not look in Josephine's direction for 11 minutes while he stood talking with Vanessa. Josephine counted without meaning to, while holding a glass of water she did not drink and listening to Darren Webb's wife tell her about a renovation. The fall on the kitchen stairs happened 6 weeks later, on a wet morning in June. Her left wrist hit the edge of the step. Marcus, in the doorway with his coffee, said she had always been clumsy and went to get his keys. She drove herself to the Meridian Women's Health Clinic in the 3rd Ward. She sat in the waiting room with her wrist swelling and found a magazine and read it cover to cover without retaining a word. On the wall beside the reception desk, a small bronze plaque caught her eye. She read it once and looked away and looked back. Adeyemi Foundation. Founding Donor. 2021. She looked at it for a moment longer. Then she turned the page. 4 months passed between the clinic waiting room and the rainy Tuesday. 4 months in which Josephine wore her wrist brace and said nothing and moved through the house with the quiet efficiency of a woman who has learned to take up very little space. The wrist healed slowly. The marriage did not heal at all. Gloria arrived on that Tuesday morning, before the rain began, with a weekend bag and the particular energy she carried whenever she sensed that something was about to be decided. She settled herself in the guest room, rearranged the towels in the hallway bathroom, and was in the kitchen making coffee when Josephine came downstairs at 7:30. They exchanged pleasantries. Gloria noted that the cardigan Josephine was wearing had seen better days. Josephine agreed that it had, and poured her own coffee and said nothing further. Marcus told Josephine to keep the children upstairs after lunch. He said it without explanation, in the flat tone he used for instructions that were not invitations to discuss. Josephine looked at him for a moment, then nodded and went upstairs and settled Amar and Kofi in the playroom, with a film they had seen before, and snacks on the coffee table and the door gently closed. She told them to stay put until she came for them. Amara looked at her with the watchful eyes she had inherited from someone in the Adeyemi line, and said, "Okay, Mama." Kofi had already found the remote. Josephine was standing at the kitchen doorway when Vanessa Tran arrived. She heard the car first, the particular sound of a well-maintained engine cutting off in the driveway. Then the front door opened and Marcus was in the hallway, and Vanessa came in carrying her own bag, moving through the entrance of Josephine's home with the unhurried ease of a woman who had been here before and expected to be here again. Marcus kissed her in the hallway, not quickly, not apologetically. Josephine did not move from the doorway. She stood with one hand resting against the frame, her weight slightly shifted to her right side to ease the wrist, and she watched. Gloria appeared from the living room. She greeted Vanessa with a warmth that had clearly been building for some time. The warmth of a woman finally able to be herself. Come in, she said, and touched Vanessa's arm, and asked if she'd had trouble with the traffic on the interstate. Vanessa said the drive over was fine, just a bit muddy on the feeder roads. Gloria said she would make a fresh pot. Vanessa said that would be lovely. Neither of them looked at Josephine. She stepped back from the doorway. She moved to the window above the sink and looked out at the driveway, where Vanessa's champagne gold sedan sat gleaming faintly in the gray November light, streaked with mud along the lower panels and the wheel wells. Behind her in the kitchen, she could hear the coffee machine and Gloria's voice and Vanessa's lighter answer. Marcus came into the kitchen for his coffee. He glanced at Josephine, then past her, and then he said it. Vanessa's car was muddy from the drive. Clean it before she headed back. He said it the way he said everything now, without looking at her, already walking away, already somewhere else in his own mind. Gloria said nothing. She was pouring the coffee. Vanessa was in the living room by then. Josephine could hear the small sound of her settling into the couch, the soft tap of her phone screen. Josephine went to the garage. She found the bucket. She went outside into the rain, which had just begun, light and steady, the kind that commits to nothing and soaks you anyway. She worked from the front panels backward with the same methodical patience she had brought to every difficult thing her life had handed her. Her left wrist ached inside the brace where the damp had gotten into it. She shifted her grip and kept moving. It was through the kitchen window that she saw it. Marcus was laughing. Not the polite social laugh she had watched him perform at dinner parties. Not the brief exhale that passed for humor in their house. A real laugh, full and unguarded, his head tilting back slightly the way it used to in the early years. Vanessa had said something, and he was laughing at it, and Gloria was smiling from the counter, and the three of them were in Josephine's kitchen in Josephine's house on land that Josephine controlled, and not one of them was thinking about the woman outside in the rain. She finished the car. She did not rush. She wrung out the sponge, carried the bucket to the garage, hung everything back where it belonged. She dried her hands on the hem of the gray cardigan. Then she walked back through the house, past Vanessa on the couch, past Gloria with her cup, past Marcus near the kitchen door, and she went upstairs without speaking to any of them. Amara was waiting at the top of the stairs. She looked at her mother's wet sleeve, at the dark patch on the cardigan's elbow, at the brace glistening with rain. "Why is your wrist brace wet?" she asked. "I was cleaning," Josephine said. "Come on, I'll read you something before dinner." She read them both a story. She did not rush that either. She tucked Kofi in and kissed Amara's forehead and turned off the light and stood for a moment in the hallway outside their door, listening to the house go quiet around her. Downstairs, someone laughed again. Josephine went to the bedroom. She sat on the edge of the bed. And into the quiet, as clearly as if he were standing beside her, with his warm hands and his unhurried voice, she heard her father. "Water does not announce itself before it carves the canyon. It simply keeps moving." She picked up her phone. The house did not quiet for a long time. She could hear them downstairs. Voices, laughter, the particular sound of a household that has reorganized itself around someone new and found the new arrangement comfortable. Gloria's low murmur, Vanessa's lighter register, Marcus's voice weaving between them, easy and unhurried, the voice of a man at home in a space that was not his alone to feel at home in. Josephine lay on top of the bed covers in the gray cardigan and listened to all of it and said nothing and did nothing, because the moment had not yet fully arrived, and she had learned from a man who spent 53 years practicing exactly this, how to know the difference. She did not sleep. Around midnight, the voices downstairs softened and eventually stopped. She heard footsteps. Marcus, not coming upstairs, moving toward the guest wing on the other side of the house. Then quiet. Then the particular quality of silence that a house takes on at 1 in the morning, which is different from any other silence. Thicker, more complete, as if the walls themselves have finally exhaled. Josephine sat up. She reached for the lamp and then did not turn it on. She sat in the dark instead, her hands resting open in her lap, her left wrist aching its familiar low ache, and she let herself be still inside the decision she had already made without quite knowing she had made it. She opened the nightstand drawer. The leather-bound ledger was exactly where she had placed it 14 months ago, when she came home from Lagos with her father's things and could not yet bear to look at any of them closely. It was small, smaller than she remembered, which was not possible, but grief does that to objects, makes them larger in memory than they are in the hand. She lifted it out and held it against her chest with both arms, the brace pressing into the cover's worn edge. The leather was cool, then it was warm. She had carried her father's words for 3 years before she understood what they were for. Water does not announce itself before it carves the canyon. She had heard it first as instruction about patience, which was correct but incomplete. She had heard it next, alone in a clinic waiting room with a swelling wrist and a magazine she could not read, as something closer to permission. A reminder that moving through difficult terrain without calling attention to yourself was not submission, it was strategy. But tonight in the dark, with the ledger against her chest and the house asleep around her, she heard it for the first time as what it actually was. It was a description of exactly what she had been doing. For 3 years she had been moving, quietly, methodically, beneath the surface of a marriage that had become something she did not recognize, through a grief that had no clean edges, around a man who had decided that her stillness meant she had nothing. And she had kept moving through all of it, not because she lacked the means to stop, but because the moment to stop had not been this one. It was this one now. She thought about Amara at the top of the stairs, her watchful eyes on the wet brace, accepting the answer she was given because she trusted her mother. She thought about Kofi missing his front tooth, already asleep, already at peace in a house that did not feel peaceful. She thought about what it would mean for her daughter to carry the memory of this afternoon. The rain, the bucket, the car, the wrist, as the image of what a woman is, what a wife absorbs, what a mother quietly accepts. She thought about that image living in Amara's body for the next 40 years, informing every room she walked into, every voice that raised itself against her. She would not send that image forward. It ended here. This was not about Marcus. It was not about Vanessa or Gloria or the firm or the money. It was about the lesson she refused to become. She reached for her phone. She found Adaz's number, the direct line, not the office line, the one Chief Emmanuel had made her memorize before he gave her the physical card, and she pressed call. It rang once. Josephine. Adaz's voice was the same at 1 in the morning as it was at noon. Precise, unruffled, already ahead of whatever came next. I'm ready, Josephine said. A brief pause, not surprise, recognition. I'll have the filings prepared by Thursday, Adaz said. That was all. The call lasted 40 seconds. Nothing else needed to be said, because Adaz Nwosu had been ready since before Josephine was. And when you are that prepared, 6 words are sufficient. Josephine set the phone down on the nightstand. She placed the ledger on the pillow beside her. Then she lay back, fully dressed, her cardigan still damp at the sleeve, her wrist still aching, the house still dark around her. She closed her eyes. Not to sleep. There would be time for sleep. She closed them because there was nothing left to decide. And when there is nothing left to decide, the body finds a particular kind of rest that is different from sleep and more complete. The rest of a woman who has finally stopped carrying something alone and placed it where it belongs, into motion, into the hands of the most formidable attorney in the state of Texas. Thursday came, then 3 weeks passed. Marcus did not notice them passing. He had no reason to. He was a man who believed he stood on solid ground, and solid ground does not send signals. It does not need to. The call came on a Wednesday morning at 9:47, while Marcus was in his office on the 14th floor of the Galleria Tower reviewing a contract amendment that no longer mattered. The voice on the other end belonged to Gerald Okafor, VP of Operations at Texline Pipeline Partners, Clark Meridian's largest client, the relationship Marcus cited most often when describing what he had built. Gerald was not calling to discuss the amendment. He was calling to notify Marcus, as per their contractual notification obligations, that the land access agreement underpinning their joint pipeline project, the Katy Corridor Initiative, 3 years in development, Clark Meridian's most significant active engagement, was under immediate trustee review. The controlling mineral rights entity had initiated the audit that morning. Gerald said the entity's name twice, clearly, because Marcus hadn't responded to the first mention. Adeyemi Subtrust 7. Marcus wrote it down. He stared at what he had written. He told Gerald he would look into it and call him back. He ended the call and sat without moving for approximately 90 seconds, which for Marcus Clark was a geological age. He called his attorney, Raymond Chu of Chu and Brewer on Post Oak Boulevard, and read the name from his notepad. Raymond said he would research it and call back within the hour. He called back in 40 minutes. His voice, when he did, carried the particular quality of a man who has found something he was not expecting and is choosing his words carefully. He asked Marcus how much he knew about his wife's family holdings. Marcus said her father had left her something modest. Some property in Lagos, some investments, an inheritance. Nothing significant. Raymond was quiet for a moment. Then he said he thought Marcus should come in. Marcus asked why. Raymond said Clark Meridian's founding pipeline access contract, the 2014 agreement that had launched the firm, the contract Marcus had framed and hung on the wall of his office, had just been flagged in the same trustee review. Marcus looked at the framed contract on his wall. He looked at it for a long time. He came in. The conference room at Chu and Brewer was on the 22nd floor, with a view of the Houston skyline that Marcus had always found satisfying. He did not notice the view today. He arrived at 1:15 and found Raymond already seated, and across the table, 2 people he did not know. A compact Nigerian-American woman in a charcoal suit who had a document portfolio open in front of her, and a mediator named Harold Keene, who introduced himself briefly and then folded his hands. Between them, on the Josephine side of the table, because it was the Josephine side of the table, he understood this now, Josephine Adeyemi Clark sat with a glass of water in front of her and her hands resting open in her lap. She was wearing a dark blue dress he had not seen before. She did not look up when he entered the room. He sat. The compact woman introduced herself as Adaise Nwosu, senior partner, Nwosu and Associates, Dallas. She said it the way people say their name when the name is all the introduction required. She opened her document portfolio. She began with the trust. The Adeyemi Foundation Trust, she said, was a privately registered holding entity incorporated across Lagos, London, and Dallas. She placed a document on the table, the trust certification, bearing Josephine's full legal name, not Clark, not Adeyemi Clark, but Josephine Chinwe Adeyemi, sole trustee and sole beneficiary, effective October 14th, 2022. She placed a second document beside it, the independent auditor's valuation letter, dated March of that year, from Harrison Mole Financial Consulting, Geneva. The number at the bottom of the page was not a range and was not an estimate. It was a certified figure, $2.04 trillion. Raymond made a sound that was not quite a word. The mediator, Harold Keene, wrote something on his notepad. Marcus did not make a sound. He looked at the number. He read it again. He looked at Josephine, who was looking at her water glass with the same expression she wore when she was waiting for something to complete itself, which was an expression he had seen many times and had always misread as vacancy. Adaise placed a third document on the table, Clark Meridian Group's founding pipeline access agreement, dated February 2014. She turned it to face Marcus and pointed, without drama, to a line highlighted in yellow near the bottom of page 3. She read it aloud. Mineral rights retained by grantor in perpetuity, non-transferable without trustee consent. Grantor, Adeyemi Subtrust 7. She set the document down and placed 3 more beside it. The active client contracts, each with a similar annotation on their access agreements, each traceable through the same sub-trust chain. Together, she said, these agreements represented 34% of Clark Meridian Group's current annual revenue. She did not editorialize. She did not pause for effect. She simply placed the documents and read what was in them, the way a person reads a weather report. Here is what is true. Here is what it means. Here is what follows. The fifth document was the property disclosure. The Clark family home on Sycamore Ridge Drive, purchased 2013, held in title through a residential sub-entity of the Adiemi Foundation. The sub-entity predated the marriage. Marcus had signed the mortgage paperwork. He had never been the owner. Raymond asked quietly for a recess. Harold Keene granted it. Marcus did not stand. He sat with his hands flat on the table and looked at the documents arranged in front of him and said nothing. Raymond touched his arm. Marcus did not move. During the recess, he called his mother. Gloria answered on the second ring. When he explained, haltingly in incomplete sentences, because he had never in his adult life been in possession of only incomplete sentences, she asked after a long pause, whether there was anything that could be done. He didn't answer. He ended the call and stared at the wall of the small side room until Raymond said they needed to go back in. Josephine was still seated when they returned, still composed, still looking, it seemed to Marcus, at something beyond the middle distance. Not at him, not at the documents, not at Adie's preparing her next folder. At something only she could see. Then she looked at him. It was the first time their eyes had met since before the Tuesday in November when he had sent her outside in the rain. He did not know what he expected. He had been bracing for something. Judgment, grief, the specific look of a woman who has finally been given permission to show what she's been carrying, but her face held none of that. Her face held something far more difficult to receive. She looked at him the way you look at someone you once loved, from a distance so complete it has become its own kind of geography. He opened his mouth. Nothing came. "You built your firm on my father's ground, Marcus," she said. Her voice was level, quiet, not raised a fraction above the ordinary. Every day. The room was very still. Dacier closed her portfolio. Raymond leaned toward Marcus and said, in a low voice, that he strongly recommended settlement and that they should discuss terms before the next session. Marcus looked at the documents on the table, at the highlighted line on the 2014 contract, at the auditor's number, at the framed copy of that same contract on the wall of his 14th floor office, which he suddenly remembered very clearly. Josephine gathered her copies, aligned their edges, and placed them in her bag. She stood. She smoothed the front of the dark blue dress. She did not look at Marcus again. She walked out of the room the way water moves. The weeks that followed did not announce themselves as consequential. They arrived quietly one after another and dismantled things. Textline Pipeline Partners formally terminated their engagement with Clark Meridian Group on a Friday, 14 days after the proceeding. The letter cited a strategic reallocation of consulting resources. Marcus read it twice at his desk on the 14th floor and then set it down and looked at the Houston skyline, which offered no particular comfort. 2 additional clients initiated formal reviews the following week. Garland Basin Resources and a regional infrastructure firm called Pecos Capital Partners. Their letters were more diplomatic. The outcome was the same. Marcus's 2 senior partners, Derek Osei and Jonathan Lim, requested a meeting. They did not raise their voices. They used words like restructure and exposure and going forward capacity. Marcus understood what the meeting was. The firm's expansion financing, the credit facility that had funded the Galleria Tower office, and the additional headcount in the brand refresh in 2021 came up for renewal in December. The vehicle holding the facility declined to extend. No explanation was required, none was given. Vanessa did not attend the settlement signing. Marcus called her the night before. She did not answer. He called again the following morning, sitting in his car in the parking garage beneath Chu and Brewer's building. She did not answer that time either. An hour later, while he was inside signing documents that systematically confirmed what he did not own and had never owned, a text arrived on his phone. He read it in the elevator on the way down. It was 11 words. It was final. He stood in the lobby for a moment and then walked to his car and sat in it for a long time without starting the engine. Gloria called Josephine on a Wednesday afternoon in January. It was the first time in 12 years that Gloria Clark had dialed Josephine's number directly. She said she thought they should talk, woman to woman, about the children, about what was best for everyone, about whether things had perhaps moved too quickly. Josephine listened to all of it from her new kitchen, which smelled of nothing yet but the faint particular newness of a space waiting to become something. She said she appreciated Gloria calling. She said the children were well and that all arrangements regarding their welfare were being managed through council. She said she hoped Gloria was keeping well. Then she said goodbye. Gloria did not call again. Marcus appeared at Nwosu and Associates' Dallas office on a Thursday, unannounced at 11 in the morning. The receptionist, a young man named Desmond Whale, informed him that Miss Nwosu was unavailable to receive visitors without an appointment. Marcus said it was personal and that he only needed 5 minutes. Desmond called back to Adai's office, listened, and then told Marcus that all communication regarding Miss Adeyemi's affairs was to be directed through counsel. Marcus left a sealed envelope. Adai's assistant, Ngozi Obi, delivered it to Josephine at a scheduled meeting the following week. Josephine opened it and read it once. She folded it along its original crease and put it in the outside pocket of her bag and did not take it out again. The new apartment was on the 4th floor of a building on Montrose Boulevard, 3 miles from the school. Josephine had chosen it because of the windows, large, south-facing, filling the living room with light from mid-morning onward. She had chosen it because the kitchen had not yet absorbed anyone's history. She had chosen it because, when she stood at the window, she could see a strip of sky above the rooftops, and the sky in Houston in January was a particular clean blue that her father had always said reminded him of the Harmattan mornings of his childhood, and she wanted to begin again in a space that held that color. Amara settled quickly. She organized her room with the same methodical seriousness she brought to most things, and within a week she had located her preferred reading chair by the window and established a routine that did not require adjustment. Kofi lost 2 things in the first 4 days, a shoe and a library book, and found them both under his bed and declared the apartment good. He did his homework at the kitchen table with the loud informality of a 7-year-old who does not yet understand that silence can be a gift, and Josephine listened to him narrate his arithmetic and felt something in her chest that had been compressed for a very long time begin, slowly, to open. One night after the children were asleep, she sat at the kitchen table with the leather-bound ledger in her hands. The apartment was quiet. The windows held the city's distant light. She had not opened the ledger since her father had given it to her. She had held it, she had carried it, she had pressed it against her chest in the dark and let it be warm. But she had not opened it, because she understood without articulating it that opening it was for the right moment. And the right moment was the one when she was ready to begin rather than to endure. She opened it now. The first page was blank except for a single line in Chief Emmanuel's handwriting, written in the dense, deliberate cursive of a man who understood that what you write you mean, and what you mean you write carefully. She read it once. Then she read it again, slowly, the way you read something that has been waiting for you. Water does not announce itself before it carves the canyon. It simply keeps moving. Beneath it, in smaller letters, as if added later, and as an afterthought that was not an afterthought at all, you simply keep moving, Joe. She sat with that for a long time. The city outside continued being itself. The children slept. The kitchen held the smell of the dinner she had cooked without being asked, for no one but the 3 of them, and it was a good smell. This story was never about money. That is the thing that is easy to misunderstand and important to hold correctly. The Adeyemi Foundation was $2 trillion, and it was also the record of a man who spent 53 years proving that what you build in silence is the only thing that lasts. Josephine did not win because she was wealthy. She was free because she had finally let what was true become visible, and what was visible could no longer be denied. What carries us is not what we announce. It is what we continue to carry quietly when we believe no one is watching, and what we lay down, finally, when we are ready to put it somewhere permanent. Before we close, we want to hear from you. Did Josephine's story stay with you? Was there a moment that landed hardest? Tell us in the comments and tell us where in the world you're listening from tonight. This community reaches every corner of the globe, and knowing where you are matters to us. Josephine closed the ledger. She carried it to the windowsill, where the south-facing light would find it in the morning, and she placed it there beside the small piece of dried bougainvillea she had taken from her father's Lagos garden the last time she stood in it. She looked out at the city for a moment. Then she looked at the strip of sky above the rooftops. That particular blue still there even at night in a different form, a depth rather than a color. She whispered something to the dark, not her father's words, her own. And the narrator, having been present for all of it, the hallway, the bucket, the rain, the ledger, the conference room, this window, goes quiet now because the story has arrived exactly where it was always going. And some places you do not narrate. You simply let them be still.